Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil mursaleen. Sayyidina wa nabiyyina wa maulana Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to you all. It gives me great pleasure to introduce to you one of the new segments for the Ikhlas Academia Library, which is called Youth Breeze. And inshallah, myself, Ilyas Amien, will be the host for many of these Youth Breeze sessions. The objective of the Youth Breeze program is to provide a platform by which we explore the impact of young Muslims around South Africa and around the world. We'll be looking at some of the issues that young people face and how do we navigate them. And we'll also be looking at how do we integrate Islam, this beautiful religion of Islam, into our everyday lives. How do we move Islam from being part of life to being life itself? Now, for today's session, we are looking at the concept of habits. And we know that as young people, as human beings, we are living very much in an age of distraction. We know that the average human being checks their phone 110 times a day. The average person uses social media for 3 hours a day, and this breeds much traction and distraction. There's a lot of useful knowledge on the internet that benefits us, that allows us to do things more quickly, but there's also a lot of useless knowledge. And being able to tackle and move the useless knowledge away and focus on what is useful is a very important skill that we need to develop. And the ability to form good habits is at the very core of this pursuit. So alhamdulillah, I have with me today Abdullahi Musa, who is a third year, final year Bachelor of Arts student at the Medina Institute, who will be talking to us about this idea of habits. How do we build good habits and how do we link that with our deen as Muslims? Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Abdullahi.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
How are you?
Shukran for having me here today, alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah, how are you doing today?
Alhamdulillah, I'm doing well and I'm excited for this very interesting and important topic, and I hope we're going to have a fruitful conversation that will be beneficial to everyone, inshallah.
Inshallah. So maybe you can start us off, Abdullahi, by telling us, give us a good definition of habits.
And habits could be understood to be a set of recurring actions that are geared towards attaining a particular goal. So for example, if one has a goal such as attaining closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they have to do some actions so that they can get that goal. So those actions, the action plan that you put forth is what we call now habits.
Shukran for that. So it reminds me a lot about Stephen Covey in his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and he looks at habits and defines habits by saying that habits have 3 different components. There's the knowledge component, there's the skills component, and there's a desire component. That in order to form good habits, we actually have to know what we're doing and the importance of what we're doing. We have to have the skills in order to do that, as well as the desire to perform those actions. So we've actually got this book. You want to tell us a bit more about this book, Atomic Habits?
Yes, and Atomic Habits is a very popular book within the self-help genre of books, and authored by James Clear. And it focuses on the idea that we can all implement small incremental changes in our behavior which feed into our good habits, and at the end of the day we hope that it helps us in attaining goals that we have set for ourselves. So small incremental changes into good habits to attain our goals.
So why would small incremental changes be better than just changing something rapidly? How would you respond to that?
And it's very, if one were to change immediately, it's very difficult for them to maintain that course of action. You know, many times we have these moments of intense motivation where we realize how important a particular goal is. So at that time, or in that particular time, you really want to do something, and you're even ready to sacrifice every other commitment or responsibility that you have in your life. But you don't realize that that action or that mindset is not sustainable. You will quickly burn out, and it will be very difficult for you to maintain that habit. So it's very important that you first set a goal, and you think of an action plan to attain that goal, and then you slowly change your behavior. And by adding gradually and hopefully, that turns into now a good habit that now helps you attain your goal. This reminds me of something that one of our shuyukh at Medina Institute, Sheikh Mukhtar, who has recently departed for Hajj. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant him a beneficial spiritual Hajj, inshallah.
Ameen.
And he's mentioned to us in class a few times that Hujjatul Islam al-Ghazali gives a very interesting particular advice on how to reduce your eating. So Imam Ghazali says that so let's say you're someone who's used to having 3 plates of food for dinner. Imam Ghazali discourages you from deciding to remove one entire plate on your next meal, but he says that every time try to reduce the amount of food that you eat by 1 morsel, and do that for 1 week, and then after 1 week you're going to be used to the amount of food that you have now changed into having. And then the second week you double the amount that you're going to remove. So slowly by slowly you'll be able to attain your goal of not overeating.
Yeah, mashallah. I think it also reminds me of the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where it is reported that he said that the best of actions are those which are done gradually. Again, so this idea of atomic habits, you've been speaking to us about this idea that we gradually incorporate new habits into our lives.
Yes.
But in a long time, maybe 1 year or 2 years, it's actually a lot.
Yes.
Small changes consistently over a period of time have massive impacts long term. So that's a wonderful thing. So if you were to take this conversation further, why would forming good habits be important as a Muslim?
It's important because good habits are a means to an end, and the end would be objectives and goals that we want to attain. So it's very important to sit down and spend some time reflecting on what goals you want to attain. Because if you live a life that isn't directed by goals, then you're going to waste a lot of your time, and at the end of the day you're going to waste your life. So it's very important that we are driven by a set of objectives. And as we spoke about in the beginning on defining habits, a habit leads to a goal. So as Muslims, what kinds of goals should we be having? And one of my favorite concepts that I've come across within my learning of the deen is a concept by Ibn Sina, or Ibn Sina's definition of the word hikmah, which is translated as wisdom. And Ibn Sina defines the word hikmah as استكمال النفس الإنسانية بتصور الأمور والتصديق بالحقائق النظرية والعملية على قدر الطاقة الإنسانية, which translates to that wisdom is the perfection of the human soul by conceptualizing things as they are and affirming theoretical truths and putting into practice what is good according or to the best of your ability. And I love this definition of hikmah because it really sums up the ultimate goal that we should be pointing or aiming towards as Muslims, which is first of all conceptualizing things as they are, which would mean that La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. You should strive to believe in what is true or what is in conformity with reality. But not just that, but also al-haqa'iq al-amaliyah, that the actions or that you put into practice what the deen teaches you. So for example, implementing the fara'id, the acts which are wajib, and imitating the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, and through this we can now attain hikmah, or attain wisdom, and at the end of the day attain the greatest value that the deen teaches us, which is al-ubudiyyah, being a servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we need to spend some time in reflecting and reminding ourselves of our goals, and which is, for example, we could use the word hikmah for that, attaining hikmah, attaining al-ubudiyyah. And once you have set your goal, then you'll now have the desire, as Ilyas, you recently, or you mentioned, you shortly mentioned about the idea of desire being an important component of habits. So once you have set a goal, you'll now have the motivation and the desire in attaining that goal. And you attain goals through habits, or through having a effective action plan. Yeah.
So Abdullah, you mentioned something very interesting. You said that one of the objectives by which we do habits, the outcome of habits is that we reach particular objectives. That really raises questions about what does it mean to be a good Muslim. Some might say a good Muslim makes Salah, is the one who makes Salah 5 times a day, gives zakah, fasts Ramadan. But if you were to ask that question, how would you respond? What makes a good Muslim?
And what makes a good Muslim would, such a question would bring me back to the idea of hikmah, which would be a good Muslim is one who knows the truth. For example, that he's learned about the true beliefs that we have as Muslims, and that he's implemented what the deen teaches us, both the outward aspects of the deen, which is found in fiqh, in Islamic law, and also the internal aspects of the deen, which is known as at-tasawwuf, or al-ihsan, or at-tazkiyah. So a good Muslim would be one who is well educated in matters of the deen, and at the same time strives in implementing what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded from him, and to abstain from what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has prohibited in him to do, and at the same time attempts, or constantly attempts in adorning himself with beautiful prophetic qualities and removing negative traits from his self, from his nafs, which is what is known as at-tazkiyah. Yes. So just to have a short tazkiyah 101, and there are 2 important ideas when it comes to tazkiyah to nafs, which is translated as the purification of the self, or purification of the soul. One idea is at-takhliyah, and takhliyah means removing negative traits, removing negative spiritual or mental traits from yourself. And the second aspect, or second idea that is very important or very fundamental in tazkiyah, is adorning yourself with beautiful prophetic qualities. So you have to first start off with takhliyah, which is removing bad traits from yourself, traits like ghadab, anger, hasad, envy, and riya, ostentation, and adorning yourself with good traits such as at-taqwa, God consciousness, tawakkul, reliance on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, husnul dhan, thinking good of others. So this is what is understood from the idea of a tazkiyah. So what makes a Muslim good, what is part of the making of a good Muslim, is someone who is well educated in matters of the deen and attempts in implementing what is taught in terms of outward actions, and also in terms of rectifying his inward self.
Yeah, shukran for that, Abdullah. So this idea that Islam has an outward shell, but also an inward reality.
Yes.
Which is very important to remember. And the idea of habits is to gear us towards that inward and outward perfection, inshallah.
Yes.
So take us through this book by James Clear. How does he suggest, or what techniques does he suggest we use to build these good habits?
Yes, and James Clear mentions the idea of the 4 laws of behavior change.
4 laws.
Yes, the
4 laws.
4 laws of behavior change. That in order to form good habits, we need to implement these 4 laws. And these 4 laws make it easier for us now to, have these small incremental changes in our behavior. The first one is making it obvious. That the habit that you would like to start practicing, you should make it obvious to yourself. That's the first one. The second one is make it attractive. The third one is make it easy. And the fourth one is make it satisfying. So just to have a brief talk on each one of them. The first one, which is make it obvious, he mentions that if you'd like to implement a new habit, what you need to do in order to make it obvious to you is connect it to a habit that you're already doing. And he calls this idea habit stacking. So for example, let's say a habit such as brushing your teeth in the morning. This is a habit that you already implement and practice every day. Now, to make a new habit obvious to yourself, how to do that would be that you tell yourself that after I brush my teeth, I will do this new habit that I would like to do. Let's say, for example, I would like, once I'm done with brushing my teeth, I would like to spend 10 minutes reading the Quran. So this is what is understood as making it obvious to you. Or in other words, habit stacking.
So you're taking something that you already do.
Yes.
That is already something that you've internalized, it's natural to you in terms of what you usually do, and then you're just associating something else with that act.
Yes,
okay.
Like for the first habit, the habit that you already do, you don't feel any like psychological burden in doing it. It's almost something that comes natural or instinctively to you.
Okay.
Yeah. So now you connect it to that.
Okay. So you mentioned that there were 4 laws, and the first one is to make it obvious, and then you said the second one is to make it attractive. So tell us.
Yes. So for making it attractive, he calls this. He encapsulates the idea of making it attractive in the phrase and temptation bundling. So it's very similar to the first step, which was habit stacking. So what temptation bundling is that you first start with the habit that you're already doing, the habit that you're used to. For example, brushing your teeth in the morning. Then you connect that to the habit that you'd like to do, and then afterwards you tell yourself that I'm going to do something that I enjoy doing. And that's where now you make it something that's attractive to you, hence the word temptation. So, and that will now encourage you to do the habit that you'd like to do, because you're going to be telling yourself, once I'm done with this, I'm going to do something that I enjoy. Let's say something like, I'm going to make myself a nice cup of coffee. That kind of thing, yeah.
So you're restraining yourself, saying, okay, I can only get this thing that I really like doing once I've done this new habit that I'm trying to incorporate into myself.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Hence making it attractive, and you enjoy doing it.
Okay. Yeah. So if I want to watch the Champions League final this evening or last evening, I have to first make Maghrib.
Yes, yeah.
Because
or more accurately, Isha. Yeah.
Or Isha. Okay. So you mentioned that number 1, make it obvious, make it attractive. Tell us about the third law.
The third one is making it easy. And what he mentions is that you should make the environment where you'd like to perform that habit and void of distractions, or you should make that environment conducive for that habit. So for example, let's say you'd like to spend 1 hour studying a particular subject, and you should attempt in making the place where you're going to study free from anything that distracts you. So let's say keep your phone away, and if you have any tabs where, let's say you have something like YouTube on one of your tabs, you remove that, and that will now make it easier for you to implement this new habit. So making the environment conducive for this new habit. Yeah.
It reminds me of what one of my psychiatry lecturers said to me in medicine, that she actually recommends that you don't study in your room.
Okay.
Because the room we associate with relaxation, rest, which is exactly the opposite of what we want when we are working. We want to be focused, we want to be driven. So just the environment that we find ourselves in plays such a big role in terms of how we feel. I remember reading one study which showed that just by having plants in your room, natural sunlight coming into your room makes you happier, it makes you calmer, and it improves your short-term memory by like 14%. Just by having a different environment in the room that you find yourself in. So just by removing those negative things that are around you can actually facilitate and make those habits easier to perform.
I guess that's why studying in a library or in a cafe is quite popular among students.
A lot of young people like studying in coffee shops now.
Yeah.
So take us through the last law.
So the last one is making it satisfying. And what James Clear mentions is that after you perform the habit, that you reward yourself in some sense. So for example, he has this idea of the paperclip strategy, that let's say you had 2 bowls, and in one bowl there's paper clips or marbles, and in the other bowl it's empty. So every time you perform this habit, you transfer 1 paper clip or 1 marble to the empty bowl, and this will bring a sense of gratification, and you know, it's rewarding to you, and that will want you to continue with this habit. So making it rewarding, making it satisfying.
So it's kind of hacking the existing instant gratification model that social media companies use, this instant gratification of likes and follows and subscriptions, but actually using that mechanism in the brain to do something which is actually useful.
Yes,
like a task.
That's quite interesting, because now you won't be acting against like the brute force of your will, because many times when you think of the idea of discipline, you always think of having to fight this feeling in you that doesn't want to do this action. But now if you hack that system of an instant gratification, it now works with you. It helps you in performing this habit. It's quite interesting.
So it also makes me wonder why video games are so addictive, is because you've got that progress meter. You get level 1, level 2, level 3. So to get people to actually measure their progress is so vital as well.
Yes, and he mentions the idea of habit tracking, which is now measuring their progress.
Okay.
You know? So knowing how many times you've performed this action, habit tracking.
Okay. So you've given us a really nice framework here of the 4 laws of how do we build better habits. As Muslims, how can we apply these laws into our own lives?
Yes, and so we did speak about this before, and the example that we can use would be performing Fajr, right?
It's a big challenge.
Yeah, so let's say that the habit that we'd like to implement is performing Fajr on time. So now let's think of how we can make it obvious, how we can make it attractive, how we can make it easy, and how we can make it satisfying. So we can make it obvious by, for example, sleeping early and also setting an alarm in the morning so that you can wake up for Fajr. So that could be one way of making this habit obvious to you. And a way that we could make it attractive is that you tell yourself that I won't have breakfast until I've established the Fajr Salah. So by this way, you will want to now perform Fajr. And also it's very important that we rectify our niyyah, because it's very easy in this, with this idea of habit, forming good habits and habit tracking, it's very easy for you to transform your niyyah from it being for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like the actions that you do for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to it being just to tick off a box.
Checklist,
or a checklist. So it's important that, for example, when we're talking about making it attractive, that you don't perform the habit, the new habit, or the action, simply because you want to get rid of it and do that thing which you see as attractive, part of the temptation bundling. So in the case of praying Fajr on time, you could tell yourself that once I'm done with Fajr, I'm going to have breakfast. So this way we make it in attractive to us. And
I also just sorry to stop
No
you on
problem,
there,
no problem.
but I think also one of the ways to make Salah attractive is to explain to people that Salah is actually not for Allah's benefit, but Salah is actually for your benefit. And we know that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that "Ju'ilat qurratul ayni fi salat," that the coolness of my eye was established in prayer. That Salah was a relaxation for me. That's why it was attractive. It was actually a relaxation for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And why is that? Why is it that when we grow up we think Salah is this burden, this chore, but for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam it was a relaxation. And I think when thinking about this, maybe I'd like to hear your own thoughts, is that Salah is not just supposed to be a ritualistic action. Salah is you're entering into presence with the Creator, you're talking to your Creator. And if you begin to understand what you're saying to Him in the Salah, especially the Fatiha. So the Fatiha is actually, most of the Quran, Allah's talking to you, right? But in Surah Fatiha, you're talking to Allah, which is a profound thing.
Yeah.
He's saying, "Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in." To you, is to we worship, and to you that we seek help. And we say, "Ihdina siratal mustaqim." Guide us to the siratal mustaqim, the straight path. So I think once we start to understand that Salah is actually for us, and we taste the pleasure of actually being in Allah's presence, that also makes the habit of Salah more attractive.
Yes.
And therefore easier to perform. What do you think about that?
Yes, and this can be applied to all acts of worship, so not restricted to Salah. And this reminds me of a hadith in the Arba'in al-Nawawiyya. In Imam al-Nawawi celebrated 40 ahadith, or collection of 40 ahadith. In one of the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ narrated from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's a hadith Qudsi. So which is a hadith which the wording of the hadith came from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, while its meaning came from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in this hadith, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لو أن أولكم وآخركم وإنسكم وجنكم كانوا على أتقى قلب رجل واحد ما زاد ذلك في ملكي شيئا ولو أن أولكم وآخركم وإنسكم وجنكم كانوا على قلب أفجر منكم ما نقص ذلك من ملكي شيئا. Which translates to that if all of mankind and if all of jinn kind had the heart or the spirituality of the best of you, that would have not increased the dominion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if all of you were the worst of human beings, that would have not reduced the dominion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So from this hadith we learn that our acts of worship do not benefit Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is as-samad, is completely, it does not need us in any way. And we are the ones who need Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if you think about it this way, all the acts of worship that's stipulated in the deen, at the end of the day, is for the human beings and well-being. For example, it's said that the maqasid of the deen, the meta goals and objectives of the Sharia all point towards maintaining the well-being of the human being and preventing harm to the human being. So that's what we see and realize, that all acts of worship do not benefit Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in any way, but they are for our benefit. Yeah.
So if you don't feel that the Salah is benefiting you, then there may be something which you need to be doing to improve the Salah, not just the quantity but the quality of that prayer.
Yes, yeah. It's almost like the spiritual reality of the Salah is absent, and when it's absent, it becomes a hard thing to do. Yeah, and it just becomes something that's mechanistic, you know, ritualistic.
It reminds me of the hadith, Inna Dina Yusr. That this deen is, it's supposed to bring ease to your life. Allah says in the Quran that we want you to have ease, we don't want you to have difficulty. And if Islam is not bringing you ease, then, as my teachers used to say, there's something wrong with your Islam.
Yes, yes, yeah,
And once we start performing these habits like Salah, fasting, all these spiritual actions, and we start to see the quality that lies beneath them, it becomes much easier to perform and more attractive to perform.
Yeah, that's an interesting way of making it attractive and easy. Yeah, hence we can kill two birds with one
stone. Yeah. And what about the last category, the last law, the satisfaction?
And I think that would be similar to making it attractive, which would be, only having breakfast after you've established the Salah. So, I don't.
But the satisfaction, the satisfying, the last law, which is like keeping track of your progress. How could we incorporate that into the deen?
I mean, I don't think it would be appropriate to count how many Fajr Salahs you've done. But and maybe there might be a more creative way for us to make it satisfying and rewarding. Yeah.
Or maybe it could be appropriate to count the Fajr Salahs, but to remember that the only reason you could have performed those prayers is because Allah gave you the ability to do them. And I think this concept that you touched on earlier, that all of our good deeds are only possible because God enabled them for us to do.
Yes.
We did it with the hands that He gave us, and the senses that He gave us. We were able to perform them because of that enablement.
Yes, and not to think that it came from you.
And sometimes by labeling certain actions that we've done can motivate us, but we still recognize Allah being the source. Do you think that's possible?
I think that could be possible, but we'll have to emphasize to ourselves the idea that it all comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and not to get into the tricks of the nafs, thinking that it came from you and that now you deserve the rewards that should come from those actions. Yeah. But I think it is possible.
So let's touch on that. You said we don't deserve the rewards. So what about this idea of, if I do certain deeds, I must get rewarded by Allah?
First of all, that would it reminds me of one of the masail in Aqidah, about whether
lessons in Aqidah. Just explain Aqidah.
Yes, so Aqidah is one of the sciences of the deen that teaches us correct creed, or the correct beliefs that we should have as Muslims. And it's a very engaging and interesting science of the deen. So one of the issues, or one of the topics that are discussed within Aqidah is in whether you can say that it is wajib on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to do something. And the view of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah is that you cannot say anything is wajib on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Compulsory for Allah, wajib being compulsory.
Yes, yeah. So you cannot make anything compulsory upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is transcendent beyond any limitations, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will and Allah's power cannot be limited by anything. So by you saying that I've performed this act, therefore Allah must reward me, you are now violating one of the important principles within Islam and found in Aqidah. But also we could say that this is this kind of thinking, this way of thinking, that if I've done this action that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala must reward me, is indicative of a spiritual defect. That now you did the action
because
not
you
for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but for the rewards. It's almost like now your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is transactional. That I do this, so I will only do this if you give me this. Or, it's very transactional. Yeah. And a higher spiritual state or maqam would be to perform actions not for Jannah or to avoid Jahannam, but because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is deserving of our worship, of our acts of worship. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or after realizing the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we should be willing to do whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded us to do.
And therefore, one of the objectives of being a young Muslim, or just a Muslim in general, is to know God,
Yes.
to know your Creator. And once you know your Creator, would it be easier to worship Him?
Definitely, definitely. Once you know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, knowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's attributes, you'll realize the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that will, or what will necessarily follow from that is humility and servitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That makes it easier for you now to implement what the deen recommends us to do.
I like this idea of deen being service. The Arabic word we use is khidmah. Do you want to expand on that? That this deen is a deen of service?
Yes, and one of my favorite quotes that I came across from Imam Fakhruddin al-Razi, who was a great theologian who lived around, I believe, 800 years ago. And he was asked, how can you summarize Islam? How can you summarize the deen? And he said that the deen is basically worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and serving the creation. That Islam is your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and and being in the service of creation. And creation meaning human beings and plants and animals, you know, the everything.
The alameen, the creation, everything.
Yes, yeah. So serving them, and what could be understood from khidmah is alleviating suffering and pain from others, and making them at ease. You know. So, for example, if you find people who are hungry or homeless, part of khidmah would be feeding them or providing them some shelter. And that one could say that khidmah comes from a place of love and compassion. You know, love, wanting that someone else is in a good state, or someone else is in a state of well-being, and compassion, meaning that you don't want them to be feeling any pain or any suffering. So I believe that important aspects of khidmah would be love and compassion.
And therefore the habits that we try and establish for ourselves should either be geared towards pleasing, loving our Creator, increasing our knowledge of the Creator, and serving His creation.
Yes, yeah.
I think it's a good summary. Abdullah, it's been great, really amazing speaking to you. Do you have any final words for the viewers that you'd like to share with them?
And yes, one would be that I encourage everyone to spend some time and maybe even journal on what goals they would want to achieve. So I think that before you attempt in building good habits, you need to first set goals for yourself. And those goals could be Deeni goals, or goals that are related to the deen, and also goals that are related to the dunya. For example, if you would like to get a particular job in etc. or other examples. So I would encourage everyone to spend some time thinking about the goals and objectives that they would want to attain. And once you identify goals, then think of an action plan or a course of action to attain those goals. And you can break down your action plan into habits, and that's where now this idea of atomic habits can come in. That by making it obvious, making it attractive, making those habits easy and satisfying, we can gradually improve ourselves and inshallah become good Muslims.
Abdullahi Musa, it's been a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you for sharing your time with us. That's all from today's program of Youth Breeze. We've learned about the importance of habit, what habits actually are, how do we facilitate, build, and maintain good habits, and how do we incorporate those habits into pleasing Allah and serving His creation. That's all from us for now. Until next time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.